So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Built Heritage Committee meeting of March 4th, 2024. I'd like to call the members to order. This hybrid meeting is being facilitated through Zoom and is being held on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, the original custodians of the unceded land in which the City of Ottawa is located. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Since this committee meeting is being streamed live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel, I'd like to remind participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call upon you to speak. For those participating here in the committee room, please use the microphone in front of you and keep your computer muted. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For those calling in, please press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this committee, you can still make written submissions to council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. We did receive regrets from member Madigan. Before we proceed, I'd like to ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call of all members.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Member Dote.
Here.
Member Legault.
Here.
Member Madigan. Member Quinn. Vice Chair Plante.
Ici.
Chair King.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you so much. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes noted on the agenda for February 13th, 2024 confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed. Thank you. We'll proceed with the agenda, consent agenda. The first item is a postponement and deferral concerning the designation of the Église Évangélique Baptiste de Ottawa at 284 King Edward Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a presentation and registered speaker, so we will hold that item. The next item is heritage permits issued through delegated authority 2023. There is no presentation. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa, but there are no speakers registered. Are there any questions to staff? Is there any interest in holding this item by any committee members? Seeing none, is the report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to Council on April 3rd for consideration. The next item is Bill 23, implementation of changes to the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Register Removal Report, Part 2. There is a presentation, so that item will be held. The next item is a designation of 2 Peter Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a presentation if needed. There is a correspondence from Heritage Ottawa in support of this item, I believe, and the owner is registered to speak if needed. I do see that the ward councillor, Councillor Johnson, is here. The first item I wanted just to determine was whether the committee wanted this item held, and I'm not seeing any interest in it being held, but I do see that the ward councillor has raised her hand for comment.
Thank you very much, Chair King, and thank you for the indulgence of the committee. This is the first Built Heritage Committee that I've been able to join, and I just wanted to get the opportunity to lend my support to this designation. This property is in the City View neighborhood of College Ward, and it's an interesting part of the city. And I just wanted to offer a couple comments because it is unusual. It is one of the few properties that would meet, certain architectural expectations of built heritage, but this neighborhood is unique. It is certainly quintessential Old Nepean. So when we think of, the amalgamation of 11 municipalities to come together under the city of Ottawa, these towns, these smaller cities had an identity and they had a history that came before amalgamation that is still incredibly important to many of the neighbors that call these neighborhoods home. And so 2 Peter Street is special, and certainly the report provided by staff goes into the details of how it is historically significant. But I'm also interested and motivated in some of the conversations that have come up through certainly the Westboro area, where you have properties that tell a story about the history of the area that don't necessarily transcend architecturally, but do still offer some touch points for the history of the neighborhood. And so I'll continue to be interested in how we look at some of our pre-amalgamation cities and what properties in there might be able to tell that story of a life lived. With City View, we had a rural example. There's a rural cross-section that's still present. We had sort of lot by lot building out. So for all of the reasons that amalgamation gives us pause when we're trying to figure out how to unify and reconcile all of these different planning realities from the past, it also gives tells a very important story about where we've come from. So I just wanted to come and talk about that pre-amalgamation Nepean, because I know it's so important to so many of the residents that call College Ward home, and just appreciate everyone who sits at the Built Heritage Committee to consider these reports. I'm really glad to spend some time with you today, and certainly the owner is keen to see this property designated. So thank you so much for your support and interest today on this file.
And thank you so much, Councillor Johnson, for your intervention and for your presence here at the Built Heritage Committee. We appreciate it. We also note that the owner is in support and is also on the call. I didn't know if the owner wanted to make any comment before this report is considered by committee.
This is the owner, Mihail Mihailovich. No, I'm good with the report and everything, and I would like just thank staff for their amazing work that they did on this. It was very informative from us, and we greatly appreciate that this is being considered. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. So is the report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. And that report will be submitted to Council on April 3rd for consideration. We now go back to the designation of the Église Évangélique Baptiste de Ottawa at 284 King Edward Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we'll ask staff for a report.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. The report before you today is for the designation of the Église Évangélique Baptiste d'Ottawa, also known historically as the French Baptist Church. Next slide, please. The property is located in Lower Town at the corner of King Edward Avenue and Clarence Street. Next slide. Constructed in 1904 with a considerable addition built between 1919 and 1920, the Église Évangélique Baptiste d'Ottawa is a representative example of a church architecture influenced by the late Gothic Revival style, a popular style in Ottawa during the interwar period and often used for institutional buildings. This style is a simplified version, which often includes characteristic elements of the Gothic Revival style, while in a manner that met the modern building requirements at the time. Typical of the style, the church features a dichromatic material palette using primarily red brick with simple stone detailing, a steeply pitched roof and prominent tower, buttressing and leaded tracery windows. The earliest part of the building was the Gospel Hall, which was constructed in 1904 on the northern part of the site, was rolled across the lot in 1919 to the southern edge of the property to its current location. At the time, this was an uncommon practice in the area, displaying a high degree of technical merit. The church is directly associated with architect William James Abra. In 1919, the congregation engaged Abra of the Ottawa architectural firm of Richards and Abra to design the new church that would incorporate the existing Gospel Hall. The property has contextual value as it is physically and historically linked to its surroundings as one of the early 20th century institutional buildings on King Edward Avenue, including the former synagogue across the street, now the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Hydro Station number 4, and the Champlain Bath. The Église Évangélique Baptiste d'Ottawa is also functionally linked to the Francophone community in Lowertown, having continuously provided French services since its establishment at the beginning of the 20th century. Next slide. The church is directly associated with the growth of evangelical Baptists in Ottawa and with the Reverend George Rainboth McFowle, champion of Baptist culture in Canada. As the first French Baptist congregation in Ottawa, McFowle and his supporters were instrumental in establishing French Baptist missions in the Ottawa Valley. The property has historical value because it contributes to the understanding of Baptist Church in Canada, and it was the first French Baptist church in Ontario. The church is important in maintaining the historic character of Lowertown, reflecting the neighborhood's eclectic mix of buildings dating from the 19th and 20th centuries. Next slide. I've included a list of some of the attributes sort of at high level here in the slide. So this includes elements such as the red brick cladding, the steeply pitched roofs, the tower, the Gospel Hall, the windows, the tracery, and the statement of attributes with the report has the entire list of attributes. And finally, the staff recommend designating this property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as we feel it meets 7 of the 9 criteria under Regulation 0906. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the detailed presentation. We did receive correspondence from the Lower Town Community Association and Heritage Ottawa in support. We have a number of registered speakers, starting with a delegation from the church. Reverend Guy Pierre Canal, Gordon Balea, and Marc Morin can address the committee this morning. Thank you for joining us, and you have 5 minutes.
OK. Monsieur le Président, merci. Madame la Vice-présidente, merci de nous avoir accordé l'occasion de représenter notre cause ici et notre opposition à la recommandation de désigner notre terrain. On trouve injuste et inutile l'imposition d'une législation patrimoniale et demande au comité de retirer la demande. Ça fait plusieurs années qu'on s'y oppose et nous trouvons qu'une telle désignation ne sert ni les intérêts de la ville ni de ses contribuables. Bien qu'on appuie l'idée de préserver notre héritage, ce n'est pratique ni convenable dans le cas de notre bâtiment. Le quartier qui nous entoure a tellement changé, en partie grâce aux politiques de la ville, politique urbaine, au cours des années, que toute valeur patrimoniale qui aurait pu exister à un moment donné ne l'est plus et n'est plus présente depuis assez longtemps. Dans le rapport du comité, c'est écrit à la page 5, « Le bien a une valeur contextuelle parce qu'il est important pour définir, maintenir ou soutenir le caractère d'une région. » Cette église est importante dans la préservation du caractère historique de la basse-ville, puisqu'elle exprime l'éclecticisme de l'ensemble des bâtiments du quartier, datant du 19e et du début du 20e siècle. Pourtant, l'avenue King Edward a été transformée en autoroute urbaine, selon la CBC, un égout routier, traffic sewer en anglais. Maintenant aussi, les changements ont tellement déstabilisé la communauté que si la situation était comme ça il y a 100 ans lorsque M. McFall cherchait à établir pas un établissement culturel, mais une place pour prêcher l'Évangile de Jésus-Christ. On n'aurait jamais choisi cette place-là. On aurait aussi bien choisi de le placer sur le Queensway. Tout ça pour dire que c'est bien beau de demander que ce soit préservé comme bâtiment patrimonial, mais le quartier qui nous entoure ne l'est plus, ni en ce qui concerne les structures bâties, ni la communauté. Aussi, à la page 5 du rapport, c'est écrit que le bien a une valeur contextuelle parce qu'il est lié physiquement, fonctionnellement, visuellement et historiquement à son niveau environnement. Mais les bâtiments autour de l'église ont été abattus ou permis de tomber en ruine. Le bâtiment est depuis longtemps dépourvu de son contexte bâti et communautaire par les changements qui ont eu lieu depuis les dernières décennies. Tout ça pour dire quasiment, c'est que le cheval a quitté la grange, puis la ville nous oblige de barrer la porte. Puis il ne reste plus de cheval là-dedans. Donc on se trouve à porter un fardeau qui n'est pas le nôtre, qui était insupportable aussi, donné notre contexte. En plus de ça, puis le quartier n'est plus sécuritaire. Et malgré les meilleurs efforts du service, la police de la ville d'Ottawa, nos bâtiments se font vandaliser. J'ai eu à rentrer à 2 heures du matin jeudi passé pour, encore une fois, ranger une fenêtre brisée par des gens qui passaient. Ça se passe à chaque semaine maintenant. Le bâtiment tombe à cause de son âge et puis aussi se fait détruire à cause de ceux qui entourent le bâtiment. L'idée théorique de préserver un bâtiment patrimonial, c'est bien beau, mais la réalité est complètement autre dans le quartier de Basseville. Nous avons juste à regarder quelques reportages de Radio-Canada, de la CBC et même de la chaîne France 24 sur ce qui se passe en Basseville. Puis nous sommes pleins au centre. Finalement, malgré nos efforts, le bâtiment détériore depuis longtemps. On a investi des centaines de milliers de dollars déjà au cours des années pour le garder sécurité du point de vue structurel, mais le temps et l'âge font le ravage. Le bâtiment est à la fin de sa vie. Et c'est en partie pour ça qu'on veut se déplacer notre congrégation. Pour nous, notre Église, ce n'est pas un bâtiment ni un projet patrimonial, c'est notre lieu de culte. On a besoin d'une place où ce qu'on peut prêcher et proclamer l'Évangile de Jésus-Christ et donner en même temps un centre communautaire à notre communauté. Puis 295 Edward ne le fait plus depuis longtemps. Donc, pour conclure, en effet, on trouve que la Ville semble chercher à maintenir un passé qui n'existe plus depuis longtemps, en bonne partie grâce à ses propres politiques qu'il essaie de manager, puis c'est bon, mais ça nous charge de la responsabilité et du coût, et on n'est pas à la hauteur d'y répondre. Oh, il me reste plus de temps. Peut-être, je m'excuse, je suis prédicateur, là, je vais trop long. Tout ça pour dire qu'on s'oppose à la désignation. On trouve que c'est pas juste, on n'a pas les moyens pour, puis ça va empêcher à ce que la ville ou un développeur fasse quelque chose avec le terrain pour vraiment servir aux besoins de la communauté. Une telle désignation va empêcher ça. Donc, on s'y oppose. Puis, désolé d'avoir dépassé les limites. Je m'excuse, Monsieur le Président. And if you wish, we can answer questions in English if you have any. I hope this was understood.
Merci. And I believe that Councillor Plante has a question for you.
Bonjour, merci d'être là aujourd'hui. I appreciate you guys coming today. If it's okay, I'm going to ask you questions in English, although I understood perfectly your presentation and appreciate it very much. I'm just going to go back a bit. Can you talk about the property itself? When did you acquire the property? Like, when did your congregation come about?
The property was transferred to us from our denomination
Right,
in the mid-90s.
mid-90s, okay. And then can you tell me a bit, like, what has transpired since then to the property? Obviously, you mentioned that you've had a lot of repairs, you touched a bit on the social disorder. Can you describe a bit what's that like, being on the corner of King Edward? What is it like for you guys?
Well, it's been a great mission field. At the beginning, when we first started to worship in the area, the configuration of the area was, let's say, reasonable. Let's use that word. There were people that were, there had always been mental health issues, crisis, but not to the point that we have now. The complexity of the issues in the lower town has exponentially increased beyond our capacity as a church. And to be honest with you, going downtown, we sometimes feel threatened by the individuals around the building. We've had cars being burnt, vandalized, people being assaulted, including Reverend Bellier and two of our other pastors. No later than last Thursday, somebody tried to break in to the building. Police called us at 3 in the morning. So
1:30.
1:30. It's just a matter of time before something major happens
Right.
downtown. Our argument is quite simple. The city's strategy is well-intentioned, but it's flawed, because you cannot ask at the same time to designate, and on the other hand to say, okay, we designate and you maintain the building. The city has told us that, staff has told us that they have a $25,000 heritage fund available on an annual basis. And I said to staff, and I'm repeating again today, that if you were to give me a check of $25,000 right now, I would not even know where to start to fix the problems with this building. I would not even know how to use it, how to plan. I'd be hopeless.
I think part
Our
of the
operations costs on this building amount to about $100,000 a year. The roof is falling apart. There's only 2 parking spots. Water's being, we have water infiltration in the basement. Asbestos issues. It's no longer safe for our people to be there. And if the city persists in this designation path, what will happen in the long run is that we will not be in a position to maintain 2 buildings. A few months from now, somebody's going to call me and say the roof is leaking, you have to fix it. And it's going to cost, let's say, an estimate of $80,000. And I've said this to you in private. Where am I going to find $80,000 to fix the roof? We cannot maintain 2 buildings. We are in the process of purchasing another facility in Carlingwood, and we've made this well known to the committee, and eventually the building will fall apart. That's what's going to happen down the road.
I think, too, we find, and we've discussed this, Councillor Plante, with you, and you've been very sympathetic. We're kind of at loggerheads in that we're in a community where all the social services seem, in 24, 25 wards, seem to be centered. At the same time, we're being told, keep your heritage building, and we're just surrounded. It feels like the little Dutch boy sticking his fingers in the dike, and people have walked away. And that is the impression. The police have not, they've been very good. But it's not a police matter, and basically we're being put in an untenable, I think anybody in our neighborhood is being put in an untenable place to say, you keep this millstone because we want heritage. In the meantime, we're continuing to supercharge the surroundings with needs that will make it impossible to do what we're asking you to do.
Right. Can I ask a question of staff?
That's after.
Okay,
So
perfect.
we
No.
do have other members pending with questions for the delegation.
Okay, can I just ask one last question?
Yes, but I'd like to remind you that the questions and the answers should be actually relevant to the Heritage Act. So we understand and we are concerned about the social challenges that confront communities in Ward 12. But obviously, we're dealing primarily here with designation of the properties under the Heritage Act.
Right. Yeah, so in the report, it talks about how, I believe it was in 2020, you guys had received that it was going to get a heritage designation. Was there any meetings between yourself and staff at the time about the heritage designation in 2020? I think it was in 2020 you said in the report? Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Was there any meeting with staff?
Madam Vice Chair, I'm having trouble hearing.
Oh, no.
That's me, that's on me, but
No, I read in the report that you guys had been approached in 2020 about the heritage designation.
it was early, I believe it was 2017 when we had the first discussion, and we first voiced our opposition.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I apologize if we've gotten kind of a little bit tangential. I do feel that our objections do fall under the spirit of sort of the whole heritage designation, in that we feel it's being misapplied. There's some areas where, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, it seems to be the city is happy to say, no, we will remove these properties from the list, yet we're being kept on in a situation which we think is untenable. So I do think there is some relevance to some of the objections we've presented.
But we appreciate those comments. I think that Councillor Lieber has a question for you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation today. Excuse me. So I just want to make sure I understand the objection well. I don't think you take any issue with staff's analysis as to the applicability of the legislation's criteria to this particular building, right? You recognize that it is reasonably considered to be a heritage building.
Certainly understand that, yes. And what's been identified, we can't contest that. There's from a heritage point of view, yes, there are valuable aspects to the building on a theoretical level, I think, yes.
Well, just to nuance that a little bit, at the beginning of the designation process, staff told us that they were considering the front wall of the church on King Edward and the north side on Clarence, the rosette on Clarence. And now we're being told that the four walls are being considered for the heritage designation. This makes absolutely no sense, because two of these walls, the south wall and the west wall, are not even visible to people walking around the building. And they're in such bad shape that we feel that they would not withstand any reasonable construction around them. They're literally falling apart, and I've shown this to Ashley. So at a minimum, two walls, I would say, okay, yeah, they have heritage value. I can understand that, the rosette and the facade on King Edward. But four walls, that's nonsense.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. That's very interesting, and it doesn't look like the roof on the south side is in any particularly good shape either, eh?
Right.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the pictures. So your objection to the designation is not on the basis of the criteria that are set out in the legislation. Your objection is because you want to have some options with respect to, I presume, moving the congregation. It sounds like you're making plans to move the congregation to a location that you consider will better serve the congregation. Have you received offers to buy the property, or have you done any overtures to sell the property?
Yes, we've been working with our agent for a couple of years now. We had some congregations that came to visit the building no later than 2 weeks ago, but the surroundings, the environment is such that nobody in the right mind would move a congregation in this area at this point.
Okay. So, and I presume what your real estate agents have been saying is, in order to sell this property, it's going to require a demolition. That if the building is required to be preserved, that it's going to be difficult to sell. Is that kind of the message you're getting?
Mr. Leeper, I think that's maybe a little extreme. Again, as Pastor Pierre pointed out, initially we're led to understand there's some important heritage aspects to the building, specifically on King Edward and on Clarence. Okay, the new designation, with some of those, perhaps a developer could fold them into a building that we build up in a land assembly. But insisting that the four walls and the periphery be kept in, I know that it's been tried elsewhere, but on a corner lot, it is just, as I've said before, we finish second in every contest. The developers say, that's nice, we're going somewhere where it's easier. The Met, when it was sold on Bank Street, has been held up as an example as, look what we can do. But from what I understand, in the developer community as such, if there's a developer community, it's an example of what not to touch a heritage building because it costs so much. It was a once and out, and nobody's going to do that again. And that's what we risk facing if we're required to keep the entire envelope of the building.
So you wouldn't object to a narrower designation of the King Edward and Clarence walls that could be folded into an adaptive reuse for some future development then?
We would not object any option that preserves the value of our asset. My concern here today is that if the city moves forward with this designation, our congregation is at risk of losing about $2 million, which we're counting on to pay our next building. So if the city makes it harder for us to sell the asset, then we're in a worse position. So we're here to say to the city in clear terms that this designation has impacts, has a $2 million impact for us, which is unbearable. It does not fit in our planning because we're planning to sell this asset to purchase the next asset.
If I could expand a little bit too on what Pastor Pierre said, as the Lord said, do unto others as you have them do unto you. We are looking at selling in concert with our neighbors. So a designation is not only going to make things very difficult for us, it's going to make it impossible for them as well. So it does not only affect us, it affects our neighbors as well. And as we discussed with the councillor, anything that might be done with the land to make it more useful to the community as a whole. So there's a couple of follow-on effects that beyond the impact on our congregation of a complete sort of four-wall designation.
Okay. And that's the neighbor to the lot to the south?
I'm sorry?
Is that the lot to the south?
Yes, Monument Laurier.
Monument Laurier, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. It just makes things a little bit clearer for me in terms of understanding the objection. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. I'm not seeing any other questions from members, so thank you so much for your delegation. The next registered speaker is Andre Major.
Hello, I don't know if Andre Major is on the call today, but if he isn't, I'm his co-listing agent. I'm happy to speak as well.
Okay. We don't know what occurred with Mr. Major because he kind of popped in and popped out. So maybe we will hear from Ms. Kirchman first and then go back to Mr. Major if he reappears. So please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Great. We actually were having a little trouble with the link, so I'm not sure if maybe that happened to Andre. My name is Jane Kirschman. I work as a development consultant, and I'm a commercial agent with eXp Realty. My colleague, Andre Major, and I represent the owners of the adjacent properties on York and Clarence Street, which have been operating as granite and tombstone shop for more than 40 years and have been good neighbors with the church for that time. In fact, there's a parking arrangement in place that has been longstanding that has helped the church operate successfully due to the constraints of having a large congregation in a downtown area who all often drive to their destination. The owners have been working with the church to assemble this site so that it's technically feasible to develop and attractive to the market to stimulate some development that would be in keeping with the need that is evident in the Byward market. Both the church and the adjacent property owners have been listed on the market for a significant amount of time, on and off for years. With like recently within the last 2 years on our side, without a single buyer coming to the table. It's really disappointing. There's such weak market interest for a site that really should be a significant gateway into the Byward market. Anybody who's walked down that York Street Boulevard from King Edward, it's got double lanes on each side and this big grassy stretch. It should be a standout location to enter into an incredibly vibrant tourist destination, and sadly, it's falling short of its own destiny. We have a humanitarian crisis that's unfolding daily down there. And for this particular site, the combined complex zoning and the market conditions with our interest rates and construction and all the things that developers need to fall into line to make something work are having such extreme negative impacts that this land assembly is a lot less desirable than it should be, considering its proximity to really some of the most wonderful things Ottawa has to offer. It's hard to know what the highest and best use is for this site, but it's pretty easy to envision a dynamic solution that would provide student housing, affordable housing, or attainable housing with some mixed use retail. And any of these kinds of development would serve to positively impact the area, meet transit and housing objectives for the city, and pump blood flow and oxygen into an area that frankly has extreme safety challenges. From our perspective, and as realtors in the market and myself as a developer, the church building and the adjacent buildings have outlived their usefulness, and the designation is going to further hamper the ability to develop the site. This should be a thriving area of the city, and a heritage designation is just going to create further stagnation on a very challenged site that is at the center of the homelessness and substance abuse crisis. Designation is a further burden that we just cannot support. We're seeking a deferral, and we've been working with the councillor and all stakeholders that we have been able to talk to get more time for the city and owners to work collaboratively to get a solution that would set the stage for development that could breathe life into this very dire corner of the market. We don't know what it would take to make this site work, but our belief and our recommendation is that a conceptual study would help us to figure that out. Thank you for the time and for listening to these comments.
Thank you for your delegation. Are there any questions from committee? Seeing no hands raised, thank you so much for your intervention. And the next registered speaker is Patrick O'Shaughnessy. Okay. And we're just waiting for Mr. O'Shaughnessy to accept the prompt. And so I think we lost Patrick O'Shaughnessy, and Andre Major is on the call as well, but hasn't accepted the prompt to participate. So maybe we'll just wait a few seconds to see if he will accept. Otherwise, we will move to questions for staff. And I don't see those two accepting invitations. So we will move forward with questions to staff. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Chair. So it seems the owner's principal objection to this designation has to do with the value of the property and the ability to sell it. Is this a factor that you typically take into account when you decide whether to designate?
Through you, Chair, no, this is not. Financial considerations are not a factor under the Ontario Heritage Act.
Okay. Now, we've heard a lot about questioning the heritage value of two of the walls on the building. If this building is designated and should a developer buy the lot, what can they and cannot do with it? Like, I'm just curious, because yes, we did hear about the property on Bank Street. It may have been expensive for the developer, but it preserved a really important facade, and it's a very successful development in the neighborhood. So I'm just wondering if you could just give us in general terms, should you put this thing up for sale, what is the new owner obliged to do if they want to develop it?
Staff are open to listening to creative solutions for this. We have some other examples around the city. The Met certainly is one. Former All Saints Church in Sandy Hill is another one that's coming, maybe familiar with that. St. Charles Church, also in Vanier on Beechwood. So we have quite a few examples of adaptive reuse building, or of churches with, I think most cases are residential uses. And staff obviously would work with an applicant to alter and do the heritage permit for that, for this designation here. We've included obviously the all four walls, so the 3D volume. However, there are no attributes listed for the rear or the back and the sides, so the non-street facing walls. So there would be opportunities for alteration to those walls with an application.
Okay, and you know, I have had applicants seek out designations in my own ward because my understanding is it does unlock funding to help with renovations or repairs on heritage buildings. Could you just speak to what new funding might be available to the applicant should this property be designated?
Certainly. As mentioned by the delegation, we do have a heritage grant program for building restoration. That would be matching grant up to $25,000 for restoration projects. We also have a relatively new program, our Heritage Community Improvement Program Plan. That's a grant program up to $500,000 for a development with incorporating heritage building, including restoration of that said building.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Member Legault.
Yes, I think Councillor Trostner asked a majority of my questions, but I just want to clarify. I'm looking at the heritage attributes slide, and so I can certainly understand the gabled roof, the brick parapet and north facade topped with dressed stone and small crest stone at the top of the gable, square tower at northeast corner. Can you just clarify the Gospel Hall, is that the back, is that the rear massing on the?
So that, I wonder if you can pull up the slide of the building. So that's the portion, the original part of the building that was built in 1904 and was moved from where the tower is, where the corner of King Edward and Clarence is today, and it was shifted across the site.
You had up.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's the part that has the front gable structure on the southern part of the lot
I see.
today.
Okay. Okay, and just to clarify once again, like you would consider the volumetric massing to be a character-defining attribute to this, right?
Yeah, typically we include, well, we're including all the walls, the brick cladding, the massing,
Yeah.
the roof, so that's the 3D volume of the structure.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Plante, Vice Chair Plante.
Merci beaucoup. Yeah, I just had a couple questions. So you mentioned All Saints in Sandy Hill and St. Charles in Vanier, which I agree are really, really well done. But I actually think the designation that you can compare this to is more the Our Lady School on Murray Street, which has basically like been this heritage wall that's been standing up for a long time. And no one's really had any sort of interest in taking that designation. And I was just wondering if that you think is a more appropriate comparison, because the reality is while All Saints and St. Charles are great, they're not close to the address that he's describing and some of the social disorder issues we're facing in that area.
sorry. Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think it's directly comparable to Our Lady School at the corner of Murray and Cumberland, in that that property is located within a heritage district. In this instance, we're proposing an individual designation. This property, I would say, has a higher level of heritage value than those walls, excuse me. And the other part there's a very long history of why those walls are still standing there in terms of how that building ended up in the situation that it's in. As far as the social issues go, I think, the province does dictate to us what we have to consider under the Heritage Act, and unfortunately, that's not part of the overall considerations. We look at the criteria under the Act. So I would say that those other sort of more three-dimensional churches, while they're in other neighborhoods, are closer examples. Those are all designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act as well.
Okay. And then finally, could you just, so say a developer say it gets its heritage designation, and a developer comes in tomorrow and they want to build something on that site, they discussed potentially student housing. Who would the developer reach out to start that process? Would it be you guys initially, because it is heritage? Would it be planning? How would that work?
Through you, Mr. Chair, generally we work with our colleagues in planning services quite closely when we're exploring opportunities with property owners. Oh, I think I must have unplugged something. I'll go over here. Sorry about that. I'll go to this microphone. So yes, generally we work directly with our colleagues in to have meetings to discuss lots of creative solutions with property owners. As you can see from the few examples we've given you, and there's many others around the city, staff take a flexible approach when it comes to designation as far as redevelopment goes. We also would love to see King Edward Avenue thrive from a planning perspective. And I think redevelopment, this site could be a really good redevelopment. And I think especially if they're able to assemble it with the parcel to the south, I think that will provide more flexibility, and there could be some creative solutions. I think the committee will see next month. We'll have the redevelopment for All Saints will be on this committee's agenda next month, and you'll see kind of the approach that's been taken there. So it's kind of a collaborative effort, to go back to your original question.
For sure. I think my concern is, and I'm just going to give the example of St. Bridget's on St. Patrick, getting my lower town streets confused here. But we've been doing a lot of fundraising efforts with St. Patrick. It's just the location itself has not lended to anything really concrete coming together at that space, and we're all looking for solutions. And I also worry that if we do get the heritage designation, there will be things like abandoned buildings, there will be things like squatters, there will be things like we saw with the Tupac that came to take over St. Bridget's for a couple months, and it's cost them over $100,000 to evict them. I just worry that the resources won't be there just from the bylaw and planning act and landlord and tribunal if the place is designated heritage and there is issues with them going forward with their new plans. That's just I know you can't answer to those questions because they're kind of beyond the heritage scope, but the reality is this corner can't just have a heritage look at it. It needs sort of a 360 from all departments at the city. So just stating my concerns.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Plant, for your comments. And obviously, I think all committee members, whether they're elected or not elected, are concerned about the challenges that we hear in our downtown neighborhoods, whether they're around traffic, whether they're around social disorder, whether they're around mental health. There are definitely a myriad of challenges, and there always will be. It is important to note, of course, that this committee does deal with the criteria that's laid out under the Ontario Heritage Act, under Part 4 for individual designation, which deals with a number of criteria to designate a building. I think it just is important to note and to underline what staff has told us, that property values are not a factor for consideration under the Act. I think it's also important to note that there has been some research that says when heritage properties are developed or, looked at in terms of property value, that often the property value are actually retained. And we've heard that, I think, from University of Waterloo research that was conducted by Professor Shipley a number of years back. So it is important to note that there are a number of complex elements, obviously social elements that impact the neighborhood, but that at committee, we are primarily dealing with what is enumerated under the Ontario Heritage Act. I see that Member Quinn has raised her hand.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, we didn't hear from the Lowertown Community Association this morning. I suspect that maybe a couple of the people that were trying to participate and were unable to for technical reasons perhaps may have wanted to speak on behalf of the community. I might be wrong about that. I'm just wondering if staff could brief us on what they have received from the community around this project.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe the LCA submitted written correspondence to the committee in support of the designation.
So they think that this will contribute to finding a solution to the challenges of this area of Lowertown?
They haven't gone so far to say anything of that matter, just that they support the designation and preserving the character of King Edward Avenue and the early building stock in that neighborhood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think that I saw Councillor Leeper raise and drop his hand. Okay. Seeing that there are no other questions for staff, and seeing that this report it does have, we've seen some concerns demonstrated by the ward count. Makes sense to go to a recorded vote on this item.
Councillor Kelly?
Yes.
Member Dote? Member Quinn?
Yes.
Councillor Troster? Member Madigan? Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Member Legault?
Yes.
Vice Chair Plount?
No.
Chair King?
Yes.
So that's 6 yeas, 1 nay.
Thank you, and this report will be submitted to Council on April 3rd for consideration. The next item is, and we return to Bill 23, implementation of changes to the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Register Removal Report number 2, and we have a presentation from staff.
Okay, good morning, Chair King, members of the Built Heritage Committee. So this will be a pretty brief presentation. This morning, we're just discussing the second of the removal reports related to Bill 23 and our implementation strategy around the different changes to the Ontario Heritage Act. And next slide, please. Okay, so just to jump quickly to the recommendations. So in total, this report recommends the removal of 100 properties from the city's municipal heritage register. And next slide, please. So just as a quick refresher to what we discussed last month, so this is part of our implementation strategy for Bill 23. These properties flagged for removal were not identified as strong candidates for designation through our initial triage review of the city's heritage register. Removal at this time retains the city's ability to list these properties again on the register over the next 5 years. It also doesn't preclude their designation in the future. And next slide, please. For further context, the properties that were flagged for removal through this report are located in wards 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So we just continue to move kind of closer into the core as we undertake our review here. And next slide, please. Very quickly, consultation. So we undertook consultation following the direction of the June 2023 implementation strategy that was approved by council, and impacted ward councilors are aware of the recommendations of this report. And next slide, please. And just to give you a quick overview of what's coming in relation to both this report and our broader implementation strategy. So we'll have another removal report like this in April of 2024, with any additional reports following as required, just to clean up the remaining properties on the register. We're also bringing forward our Heritage Conservation District Study Area Report in May 2024. So that's going to include, as we've discussed before, a list of potential study areas for Heritage Conservation District studies, as well as the Heritage Conservation District study terms of reference for those study reports. And next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation today, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We did receive correspondence on this file from Heritage Ottawa. There are no registered speakers. Are there any questions to staff? And seeing no hands raised, I just want to thank staff again for the hard work. We know this is another report in a series of reports to remove items from the registrar in order to ensure that we can maintain a calendar and have options for ultimately a made in Ottawa solution around individual heritage designation. So we appreciate all the hard work that's being undertaken, and we know that there's more work to do. So is this report carried? Carried. Thank you so much, and this report will be submitted to council on April 3rd for consideration. There are no in-camera items. There was an item that was information previously distributed around designation refusals for spring 2024. There was no presentation scheduled for that item. Notices of motion. Seeing none, are there any inquiries? And I see that there are no inquiries. Is there any other business? I guess not. Well, thank you. On adjournment? We're adjourned. Thank you so much. The next meeting of the Built Heritage Committee is scheduled for April 9th, 2024.